So this is Parsha Vayishlach, and He sent. We've been here before, and lots of good stuff in this Torah portion this week. But before we get into the Torah portion proper, there's some things that I want to discuss. As you all know, that we're approaching the holiday of Hanukkah. Now, this is not an OT, capital N, not a commanded Moedim. This is a traditional celebration, but it's something that we like to do, and we encourage people to partake. It's just a fun holiday. But it does have some significance behind it. And as I was kind of just looking at Hanukkah and, preparing for the upcoming celebration and those kinds of things as I was preparing the message and everything else, there were some parallels that jumped out at me. Now, let's take a look at where we are right now. Okay? Let's start there, the present. We can see, just flipping through the news, paying attention to what's going on around us, we see that there's this big societal push to disregard or demonize any religious aspect, any religious standard, whether it's Christian, Islam, whatever it is, right? If it's a religious standard, the culture wants to tear it down. So we know that's going on. So there's an external pressure that we're dealing with. Also present in the seats of power, right? The U.S., other countries, right? This is going on globally. There's an allegiance with the only way I can describe it is anti-Christian or anti-Christ ideologies and practices, essentially, right? We see the rise of this whole green religion, if you will, because that's essentially what it is. I forget where they were, but where they just gave the new green 10 commandments, and then they had this written on stone tablets, and then they broke them, and then they had the other tablets, and they
I knew that they did it at Mount Sinai.
it was that church, or it was the old monastery near Mount Sinai. I forget the name of it, but yeah, that's what I heard, that they actually broke the tablets, and then they have their replacements, and they're going to reenact this at other holy sites globally. That's kind of the tour. So this is what's going on in our world. There's just a lot of stuff going on. We'll leave it there. But now here's the big thing. Sins that were once hidden, right? We know certain sins have been around for a long time. They used to be hidden. They used to be behind closed doors. They weren't accepted in regular society. But now these same kinds of sins that were once hidden are now normalized. They're normalized and accepted, and they're practiced openly. And not just practiced openly, they're done, when they're practiced openly, they're actually celebrated. People are clapping and cheering when people do these kinds of things. And the other troubling thing is that there's a growing trend among the coming generations to abandon the faith of their forefathers, their forebears, in favor of atheistic cultural norms. What do I mean by that? The next generation is completely abandoning the faith of their parents, grandparents, etc. Right? They're buying into a lot of these things. And so what we're looking at is a part of the great falling away that Scripture talks about. Right? It says there will be a great falling away. And we're seeing this on a cultural level. Everything is changing and transitioning. Right? I look at, we just had our midterm elections, and I know a lot of us were disappointed with the results. And what really bothered me is I look at Western Michigan, I look at America as a whole, and we were known for being the Christian nation. And especially in our little town here, we like to joke there's a church on every corner, right? Because there almost literally is a church on every corner. And if we're this spiritual, right? If we're this spiritual, how are some of these things taking place in our society? That's a question. And so it's very troubling. Now, I came across, I'm sure some of you have heard of the Pew Research Center. They do a lot of these studies and things like that. And there was an article from September that is new to me, I just came across. But it's called Modeling the Future of Religion in America. I suggest you look it up if you're interested. But here's just a few highlights from that article. It said in 2020, 64% of Americans identified as Christian. Now, I thought that floored me right there, 64%. I remember growing up, the thing was, America, most people in America, about 99 to 98% identify as Christian. Now we're down to 64%. These are people who just identify as Christian. We're not talking about necessarily practicing or being devout, we're just identifying. We went from high 90s to now we're 64% of our nation only identifies. And we know the percentage of practicing Christians, devout Christians, is even smaller than that, right? So they're looking at all these factors, all these different things, and you have to read the article, it's quite in-depth. But projections suggest that the identifying Christians will shrink to 54% by the year 2070. It's a downward trend. Smaller and smaller. That's about half the nation identifies as Christian, whereas the other half does not. What does this mean? Half the nation's in power. Half the nation is in government. Half the nation is in the authority structure of our government. Half the nation speaks into our culture, right? Half the nation supports those who do these things. Okay? This is where all these things are getting their impetus from, is the people, right? The people make up the culture, right? The leaders that lead that culture, they come from the people. Now it says the religiously unaffiliated, those who don't identify as any kind of faith or with any kind of faith group, are projected to exceed Christians. That's the trend we're on. And then they also go on to say that Christians would lose majority status by 2050. That's even closer yet. I would suggest we're probably already there, practically. But here's the big takeaway. The United States is going from a Christian nation to a post-Christian nation. That's where we are today. Now, we know, looking at Scripture, we know that the great falling away is going to happen. We know that things are going to get worse before as we near the end. We know these things are coming, right? But we have to live in this. This is where we live, okay? The thing about eschatology, as we look at that and these prophetic things, they're not so far away like they used to be. We used to study these things, Revelation and end-time prophecies and things like that. We know what's going to happen, but it's way over there. But doesn't it feel closer today than it ever used to? Doesn't it feel like, wow, I might actually see a lot of these things in my lifetime? You know, growing up, we knew the Lord was going to come back. I just never gave it a thought that I would actually live to be an age where I would see that, right? Never doubted that it wasn't going to happen, but just, that's for generations way down there. Some days I wake up and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to make it to 50 before the Lord returns. You know, it's just what it feels like sometimes. You look at things that are going on, it's like, how can he not come? You know what I mean? It's wild. So what does this have to do with Hanukkah? Well, let's look at some highlights from Hanukkah, from the story of Hanukkah, and hopefully everybody's familiar with this. But what happened in Hanukkah? We had the Maccabean revolt, which was launched by priest Matthias, and it was a response to the imposition of societal norms of his day. So what happened? The culture was very pagan, right? Very pagan. And those in authority said, hey, we don't like this religious stuff you're doing. We want you to do it our way. And by the way, we're not just going to try to coerce you, we're going to force you to do it. And so they came to priest Matthias and they said, look, you're going to start sacrificing these Greek gods. You're going to sacrifice pigs in your temple and all this kinds of stuff. And Matthias was like, nope, not happening. Those in power brought enforcement upon the people of faith that they no longer regarded as sacred. Right? That was step one. That's where we're at today. We're being disregarded and demonized. No longer are people of faith considered sacred in the U.S. Right? It used to be, if you were a pastor, and to some extent it kind of is in some areas, but even just a handful of years ago, if you were a pastor, you could go just about anywhere, and if people knew you were a pastor, there was a modicum of respect. Whether they agreed with you or kept your spiritual viewpoint or not, there was respect there. You were treated with respect because you were a person of faith. Some places you go in this country, you might not want people to know you're a person of faith. You might not make it out of there. It's interesting that in the Hanukkah story, Matthias' revolt was first against his own countrymen. Now what was going on here? There were those who apostatized, turned from the faith into Hellenization. Hellenization was the adoption of Greek culture at that time, which was predominantly pagan culture. Right? But they liked a lot of the things that were in there, so they said, let's adopt this. And then there was those who really stepped over the line and just said, look, I'm going to kind of abandon everything else and adopt this culture, and I'll just make it a part of my worship practice. Right? It was really the blending of Greek pagan culture into their daily practice, their worship practice, their sphere of life, their sphere of existence. Matthias had a problem with this, because this is what empowered all this stuff in his day. He was warring against the culture. Now, Antiochus IV, he's the one who spearheaded the Hellenization. He wanted to bring this global standard, right? That was part of his deal. Even if it ran afoul of the Jewish people. Because why? He did not respect people of faith. I don't care what you believe, I don't care what you do, you're going to do it our way. And if you don't want to do it our way, we'll bring force to bear on you. Now it's interesting that under Antiochus III, the Jews enjoyed religious autonomy. They were allowed to worship the way they wanted to worship, how they wanted to do it, and they were left alone. No persecution, no problem. You guys don't believe the way we do, that's fine. We still respect you enough to leave you alone. Those days are gone today. And it underscores the fact that one man in one generation can change from peace to persecution. We look at our elections, and we see that's exactly what has happened. We had a modicum of peace under one administration, and on the other has been clearly hostile to people of faith. And it's not just here in our country. You look at other countries, what's going on there. It's the same things happening. People in authority and power are using their power, their influence, to bear against people of faith. Right now, it's not like in Matthias' day where they're showing up with, legions of troops and swords, right? But that is the logical conclusion. And so the parallels that I saw between the Hanukkah story and where we are as a society today There was a cultural shift that took place that was hostile to people of faith, both today and then. In both cultures, sin was openly practiced and accepted within society. And the existing power structures aligned themselves with godless ideologies and allegiances. Whether it was Rome from yesterday or those in power today, the governmental structures today. We're seeing this more and more. Anything that was even moral is being tossed out. And then many people today, just like in Matthias' day, apostatize by either mixing, which I can only call an antichrist spirit because it's anti-Christian, anti-Christ, mix that into their worship and practice, or they abandon their faith altogether. That's what we're seeing with these lower percentages. From 98, 99% identifying down to 64. And once again, just to reiterate, there are those who identify, and there are those who are devout and practicing. And we know that's even a smaller percentage yet. So the powers that came to bear hostilities upon people of faith towards the logical conclusion of persecution. I believe that's where we are headed, not just in this nation, but globally. Scripture would affirm that. Now again, a lot of times we might have said we know that's going to happen, but it's way down the road. My point in all this is that I don't think it's way down the road. I think it's a very real possibility we can start seeing some of these things. Other countries have endured levels of persecution for a long, long time. Right? We always talk about them, pray for them, try to help them. But we've been insulated in America. We have enjoyed religious freedom, religious autonomy for many generations. Could things drastically change? Anything's possible, sure. But if we keep going down the path we're going down, the logical conclusion is that very quickly, the freedoms that we once enjoyed, religiously speaking, will not be there. You know, there's this whole Marriage Protection Act that has every indication looking like it's going to be signed into law. And the very problem with that is now you don't have the right to say, no, Mr. Homosexual couple, Mr. and Mrs. Homosexual couple, we are not going to marry you. You won't have that ability to say that anymore as a religious organization. That will be discriminatory, and they can throw the rule book at you. Fine you, jail you, silence you. This isn't something that's going to happen in 5 years. We'll probably see this very, very soon. The president's already said he's going to sign it into law if it comes across his desk. So, just that one thing alone is going to change the religious landscape in this country. I don't know, I mean, there's other people smarter than me that maybe they see a way around this. But this is going to be the trend. If we somehow dodge this bullet, what's next? Because there'll be something else, and then something else, and something else. You see, modern day believers were not exempt from changing cultural tides. These transitions on their current course will cause increased hardship. And now we have a choice, just like Matthias when he launched his revolution. Do we bow to these things, or do we resist them? And the thing about resistance, because a lot of us say, well, we're not going to bow. right? We're not going to bow. We're believers, we're not going to bow. Now we stand out. Our non-conformance not only makes us a peculiar people, which is something we've talked about many, many times here. We are called to be a peculiar people. One, we are called to stand out. One of the other things we've talked about, as you stand out, we're approaching a day where standing for the Lord will cost you something. It's not free anymore. We don't get to say, I stand for the Lord, and then just walk peaceably on our way. We're approaching a day when we say, I stand for the Lord, that is going to come at a cost. Right now it might be legal entanglements, accusations, antagonism, right? Down the road it could mean fines, jail time, and then the logical conclusion beyond that, death and imprisonment and death. Things that other countries have endured for a long, long time. We will start to see on our shores. This is what we have to wrestle against. And it's this negative influence of a fallen world. And this is where I want to tie into our Torah portion. Because we talk about, this whole Torah portion, we're going to talk about Jacob and how he's kind of wrestled a lot of different things in his lifetime. But what was he facing ultimately? He was a standout individual in a society that was fundamentally different, and he had to wrestle with all these things as he existed. Yet God was with him. So, Ephesians 6:12, let's look there. I want to read that. Where are you? Ephesians 6:12. Many of us have heard this verse. For we are not struggling against human beings, but against the rulers, authorities, and cosmic powers governing this darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm. So take up every piece of war equipment God provides, so that when the evil day comes, you will be able to resist, and when the battle is won, you will still be standing. 12 and 13. I'm saying all this because this is just some things that kind of jumped out at me in my studies, but I'm saying all this not to be doom and gloom or anything like that, but to get us to a place where we're at least mentally prepared for the possibility, the potentiality of what's coming to this nation. You know, a lot of times we like to say, the Lord's going to protect us, and I believe He will. He will provide for us, He will protect us. But that doesn't mean we don't go through trials. Right? And it doesn't mean we don't have to deal with hardships. You know, the Lord said, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you. He also said the disciple is not greater than his master. We don't get a pass. So I look at all these things that are going on in our culture, and it gives me pause. And I have to look at myself. Am I ready to face these things? It's easy to look at it and say, oh yeah, I'll stand up against that until it's on your doorstep. So those are things that we should be praying into, is that we are prepared to resist these things. That we are prepared to maintain our peculiarity, as it were, even if it costs us something. All right, let's get into our Torah portion. We'll see what Jacob did when he had to face hard situations. Genesis chapter 32. Starting with verse 3. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to Esau his brother toward the land of Seir, the country of Edom, with these instructions. Here's what you are to say to my lord Esau, your servant. Jacob says, I have been living with Laban and have stayed until now. I have cattle, donkeys, flocks, male and female servants. I am sending to tell this news to my lord in order to win your favor. So our Parsha opens with Jacob sending messengers to Esau. Now, we know Esau, he had been with Laban. He had gone through a whole host of things in that environment, a lot of hardship, a lot of issues, but God prospered him. And now he's finally separate from Laban, and now he's out kind of in the wilderness, and somebody says, hey, your brother Esau, remember that one that you stole the birthright from, who's really ticked off at you, he's headed your way, and oh, by the way, he's got 400 armed men with him. And we really not sure what he's about, right? We don't know what his intentions are. So you can imagine Jacob's probably scrambling at this point. Like, this is not a good situation. So he divides his family into two camps in trying to hedge off if there was an attack. You know, he can only attack one camp at a time, so some will be spared. Just a side note, and we'll come back to this, but rabbinical commentary tells us that Dinah, his only daughter, was hidden from Esau due to her beauty. He wanted to make sure that Esau did not take her for himself, supposedly. You can find that in Jasher, the book of Jasher, verse 32, chapter 32, verse 53, excuse me. But again, that is rabbinical commentary. That's not necessarily scripture. So do with that what you will. Now, during this, he kind of sends the family away, and he's kind of hanging out by this river, and night comes, and he ends up wrestling with this person, okay? Now, it says that he wrestled with an angel, and there's a couple of views, is that either the angel was the spirit of Esau, right? Maybe it was Esau's guardian angel. Some would suggest that it was Esau himself, which is really kind of a third view. But this is interesting because I haven't really found like why they say this was Esau and not somebody else. If we go to Genesis 27. Where's this? Genesis 27 verses 40. It says, you will live by your sword and you will serve your brother, but when you break loose, you will shake his yoke off your neck. So that kind of has something to do with the idea that as it relates to the blessing that Esau was given by Isaac, that there would be this tension between the brothers, and at some point Esau would be able to break away, right? So there's kind of some, maybe that has something to do with this wrestling, why they say that this is somehow Esau, right? It's his spirit, his guardian angel, or possibly himself. Now, another view is that this angel is the angel of the Lord, right? I.e. God himself. Now, I don't know if any of you caught the post that I put on Band, but just the last time we were together, me and William were talking about this, because we see this in other places in Genesis, this whole angel of the Lord, right? So there's a couple of interesting views with this, because a lot of times people would say, well, this angel of the Lord, that's God himself, it's Yeshua, right? Maybe it's some manifestation of the Holy Spirit, right? We've all heard these kinds of different things. So on that post on Band, I'll just a few highlights from that. The Jewish view was that the angel is not an incarnation of God, right? It's not some form of God, but simply a messenger or a servant, right? A created being, an angel. But yet, when we look at the text, this is what kind of makes it confusing, because we have this angel, this messenger figure, and then all of a sudden it seems like God himself is speaking. And so, but we're not told that there's been a transition or a shift there. And so it gets confusing. But the Jewish view is that the messenger speaks on behalf of God, but in the first person voice. So this gets interesting. It's still the messenger, but it's speaking as if he were God, right? And so when we read the text, we go from messenger to God speaking. It's actually just the messenger speaking on behalf of God. There's a whole bunch of stuff, some textual anomalies, that's why they come to this view, that kind of thing. But basically, the angel of the Lord is, in the Jewish view, is not God, right? He's simply a messenger. And so therefore, he's not worthy of veneration. And we see this in the scriptures as well, right? Somebody gets an angelic visitation, what's the first thing they do? They drop to their knees and bow. And what's the response? The angels don't do that. Stand up, right? I'm not to be worshipped. Now this one gets a little interesting because in Genesis chapter 33, verse 10, we have Jacob. Let's see, where did he say here? 9 and 10. It says, Jacob said, "No, please, if I have won your favor, then accept my gift. Just seeing your face has been like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me." So this is what he says to Esau, right? And it's interesting because he names this place, what was it? Peniel, I think it was. Yeah, it says, and the sun rose and he went up past Peniel, limping at the hip. But he equates this whole encounter with seeing the face of God, right? With interacting with God. And that's what he likens it to. So you can imagine that maybe in his mind, this was such a profound experience that that's the only way he could relate. Like, I must have been with God because this was just an amazing encounter. But this whole thing, this whole wrestling thing that he goes through, it's a prophetic indicator of how the rest of his life would be. He was always going to be wrestling something. I think a lot of times, at least for myself, I read this story and went, okay, he wrestled, he prevailed, and he went on with his life. But if we read the rest of it, about the rest of his story, that was just like one hard encounter that he did prevail, yes. But then he had another one, and another one, and another one. And I think this is where a lot of times us believers get twisted up. Man, I went through that one hard situation that one time, now I'm good. And we settle it in our mind like, I prevailed. And I don't have to deal with any more stuff. And then when something else smacks us in the face, we're like, what happened? I prevailed over there. You mean I got to deal with something else? Jacob did. He had to deal with several situations throughout the rest of his life. God promises that he will be with us, that he will help us to overcome. He will put his spirit, an overcoming spirit, within us. He never promised we will not have to go through stuff as long as we're on this earth. And we will. We're in a sinful, broken world. We're going to have to interact with that world either positively, preferably, or negatively. Probably a mix of both until we go home to be with the Lord. Now, Dinah gets molested. And this causes a big problem for Jacob and his family. Now let's look at her story. To really flesh out her story, Because really, we come to verse 34. I'll just read it here. Verse 34, chapter 34, verse 1. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the local girls, and Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the local ruler, saw her, grabbed her, raped her, and humiliated her. Done. End of story. Right? Talks about how he wanted to marry her, and then we have the whole, that whole situation. But that's really all the information we have. Now, if we come out of the canonized text and into the book of Jasher, we get a lot more information. And I want to share some insights from that. So this is from the book of Jasher, chapter 33. And he gives us some more insight into this event. And starting with verse 5, it says, "At that time, some of the women of the inhabitants of the land went to the city of Shechem to dance and rejoice with the daughters of the people of the city. And when they went forth, then Rachel and Leah, the women of Jacob, with their families, also went to behold the rejoicing of the daughters of the city. And Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, also went along with them and saw the daughters of the city, and they remained there before these daughters while all the people of the city were standing by them to behold their rejoicing, and all the great people of the city were there." So we get the idea, the whole family went to check out whatever this festival, this celebration was. See, without this text, we might think that Dinah just went off on her own. Got into trouble, right? The whole family was there. So essentially, this was what a lot of commentators say. It was some type of harvest festival, right? And the whole city was taking place, and Jacob's family said, "Hey, we're close to the city. They're having a festival. Let's go check it out." But her excursion ended tragically when she was abducted and then raped by the crown prince. I think we have that. From the book of Jasher, 33:10, it said, "And Shechem beheld Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and when he looked at her, his soul became fixed upon Dinah, and he sent and had her taken by force. And Dinah came to the house of Shechem, and he seized her forcibly, lay with her, and humiliated her. And he loved her exceedingly and placed her in his house." So he took her by force and kidnapped her, kept her. Some interesting information. Now, the brothers, they exacted their revenge. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it's interesting because when she was in Shechem's house, she wouldn't leave. She wouldn't leave. And rabbinical commentary says that she was making statements like, "Where would I go with my shame? I've been humiliated. I can't go back out to my countrymen because no man will touch me." Right? So she was unmarriable at that point. She was humiliated. And one of the things, according to rabbinical commentary, that got her to come out after their ruse, after they were able to do this, Simeon swore to take her as his wife. He says, "Look, I will marry you. I will provide for you, right? I will restore you in that way." So he wasn't going to leave her in this humiliated state. Now, Genesis 46:10, let's jump there. Because it talks about their offspring. The sons of Simeon, Yul, Yemin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. This Canaanite woman was Dinah. And they call her that she was a Canaanite woman because she was violated by a Canaanite who was Shechem. Right? So that's what rabbinical commentary would tell us about this. Now, this is also interesting while we're talking about commentary, that Dinah had a child as a result of this violation. And the family didn't really know what to do with this child. And they said, well, we don't want to keep the child. We've got to do something with the child. So commentary says that Jacob made like a necklace with God's holy name on it, made out of gold, put it on the child, and then sent the child to Egypt. Well, the sages tell us that this girl, her name was Osnath, and she was sent to Egypt to Potiphar's house. And who was Potiphar? He was the one that owned Joseph after he pulled him out of the prison, right? And so he ended up giving Osnath, Pharaoh said, hey, you've got Osnath, you've got Joseph, you give her to him as wife. Well, that means that she was related, right? And their offspring would have been related back to that bloodline. So, pretty interesting point. Now, the sages also tell us that either Potiphar was a eunuch, which I think might not be, that doesn't hold a lot of water with me because he had a wife. Most eunuchs didn't have wives. Or that his wife was barren. And they say that is why she was going after Joseph. Because he couldn't perform in that way to generate offspring, whether he was a eunuch or she was barren. I thought that was an interesting little thing. But back to Dinah. Jacob's sons, we know the story, they devised this plan for revenge, right? They said, look, if you want to marry Dinah, this is what's got to happen. You've got to be circumcised, and once Shechem talked to all his men in the whole city, like, look, we can intermarry with them. They've got daughters. We've got sons. All you got to do is just undergo this procedure, and you'll be good, right? And apparently, everybody went for it, right? The whole city. And so the sons waited till the men were sore and not able to fight, and they went and decimated the city. They just destroyed it. And they ransacked the city, and they took the women and children of the city captive, plundered it, all that stuff, killed all the men. But this is what's interesting, because later we find out, as we read on, that Jacob's sons took some of these women as wives, which was kind of taboo because they weren't Hebrew women, right? But this is interesting. This whole circumcision sequence, that would have been seen as legal conversion. Remember, we talked about this, right? That was the whole Judaizers thing. You had to be legally converted. This would have been seen as legal conversion for both the men and the women, right? Because the men represent headship, okay? And so if they undergo this, then therefore, by extension, the women are circumcised. And because they're circumcised or legally converted, they're eligible for marriage. It's pretty interesting. And there's some scripture references you can check out. But it basically made the women of Shechem eligible for intermarriage, is what that did. Now, Dinah ends up being restored. She's taken out of Shechem's house. She married Simeon, and she leaves for Egypt with the family. This is interesting because the book of Jasher, back to the book of Jasher, we get some more information on this. And this is chapter 54, verse 80. Actually, so this is where Joseph finally meets up with his family, right? And he's in a position of authority, of affluence, and he starts sending gifts to his family members, right? His extended family members. Let's go to, let's start with verse 80. And Joseph rose up and gave unto them 11 chariots from Pharaoh, and Joseph gave unto them his chariot upon which he rode on the day of his being crowned. in Mitzrayim to fetch his father to Mitzrayim. And Joseph sent to all his brothers' children, garments according to their number, and 100 pieces of silver to each of them. And he also sent garments to the women of his brethren from the garments of the king's women. And he sent them, and he gave unto each of his brethren 10 men to go with him to the land of Canaan, to serve them, to serve their children, and all belonging to them, coming to Mitzrayim, or Egypt. And Joseph sent by the hand of his brother Benjamin 10 suits of garments for his 10 sons, a portion above the rest of the children of the sons of Jacob. And he sent to each 50 pieces of silver and 10 chariots on the account of Pharaoh. And he sent to his father 10 donkeys laden with all the luxuries of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys laden with the grain and bread and nourishment for his father, and to all that were with him as provisions for the road. Verse 84. And he sent to his sister Dinah garments of silver and gold, and frankincense and myrrh, and aloes, and women's ornaments, and great plenty. And he sent the same from the women of Pharaoh to the women of Benjamin. So she gets a gift. She gets, not only is she restored maritally, right? So now she has her social position back, right? She's kind of back in social standing, if you will. She's not a defiled woman anymore. But then Joseph gives her all these luxuries, right? Heaps all these things upon her. And these things that they weren't just like regular gifts. These were taken from Pharaoh's women, right? From his harem, if you will, right? So these were fine, costly things. And so she becomes fully restored, both socially and materially. And I thought that was really interesting that we don't get that just from the Torah itself. We have to kind of look at some other books to see what all happened.
Luther.
Yes?
Does Joseph know that he married his niece?
That I don't know. I haven't seen where the sages kind of, they tell us that, but I haven't seen anything where he knows that.
Sure.
So.
Okay, I'm just curious.
And I was wondering now, Simeon married his sister.
Yes.
Different mothers?
Different mothers, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
So going on in the Torah portion, Jacob is wrestling with this whole situation, right? His big takeaway was, okay, not only did my daughter get hurt in this, but now my sons went and slaughtered this whole city. And now I've got a problem because the surrounding nations are going to hear about this, and if they don't like it, they're going to band together, and I'm not strong enough to take on everybody. You know, he told his sons, like, you've made me stink among the nations, right? You put me in a dangerous position. So now this is another situation he has to deal with. So at some point, God says to Jacob, get up and go to Bethel, and there, and live there and make there an altar to God who appeared to you when you fled Esau your brother. So he says, okay, let's go. And everybody kind of takes off, headed for Bethel. Now, according to the Torah, this is another little tidbit. We don't have any information stating that he had contacted his mother, that he had talked to his mother. We know that he was close with his mother before he fled, right? And we have no information suggesting that he was able to communicate with her in any meaningful way. So now near the end of Jacob's 14-year service to Laban, his mother sent Deborah to summon Jacob back home. And this kind of ties in with the Lord telling him to go. So his mother sending a messenger, right? And so during this time, Jacob's service to Laban prevented his return. So Deborah ended up staying with Jacob. And this is why sages suggest that Deborah's death is recorded in Jacob's return to Bethel, because she was there, right? Deborah was his mother's handmaid and she ended up dying with Jacob because she was waiting for him to finally come back home. And that's in Genesis 35:8. But now Rachel died during childbirth during Jacob's travels. He's going back to Bethlehem and she dies. All right, she dies during childbirth. And so she was buried in Bethlehem. And it's interesting that she is the only matriarch not buried in the cave of Machpelah. Right? We know Adam and Eve were supposedly buried there. What was it? Was it Abraham, I'm thinking of, was buried there?
And his wife.
Yeah, Abraham and Sarah. But anyway, so the sages say that Rachel was buried in Bethlehem because possibly Jacob foresaw his descendants passing the burial during the Babylonian exile. And that's where we get this, Rachel will weep for her children. Also, Herod's attempt to murder Yeshua by the slaughter of the Hebrew children is also connected to Rachel's tears. So these are two prophetic events that they say maybe Jacob foresaw some of these, or God clued him in on some of these, and that's why he chose to bury her there instead of carrying her body back. Again, that's a commentary. It could have just been a matter of expediency. You know, you're not going to carry a corpse that far. And so we're just going to, we're going to bury you here. Now, a lot of us might remember this from the last time where we have Reuben, right? Jacob's firstborn son from Leah slept with Rachel's handmaiden Bilhah, right? The mother of Dan and Naphtali. And then it says he did this and Jacob heard about it. And then we kind of move on. But it's interesting because why would his oldest son essentially sleep with his stepmom? Right? Or his stepmom's handmaiden. Because we know that Bilhah has had children from her father, right? So what's going on here? Could he just not control himself, right? I don't know. This is interesting. I just learned this. Last time we were here, I didn't know any of this. Reuben's actions were a power play to secure his mother's position as the favored wife by eliminating Bilhah, the potential of Bilhah to move into a favored role. Now what's going on here? We remember Leah and Rachel, right?
Yeah.
Jacob loved Leah. She was the favored wife, right? And he loved Rachel. And yeah, Leah was the unfavored wife. She was a little weak eyes.
They were sisters.
Yeah, they were sisters. And there was always this competing. Now Leah was having lots of children for Jacob. But yet she was vying for his affection and she wasn't getting it. I guess he loved Rachel. Now Rachel is past. So now's a chance for Leah, I'm getting my names crossed, for Leah to move into that coveted favored wife position, right? The competition's gone. But we have a problem. We have Rachel's maidservant, Bilhah. So now there's the potential that maybe Dad likes her better. And Leah is still left out in the cold. So how can I fix this? If I sleep with Bilhah, then she will be defiled in my father's eyes. And she will not move into that position. Therefore, the only one that can move into that position is Leah. So this was like a political power move within the family. So this would, by extension, place Reuben in a more favorable position within the family hierarchy. Why? Because he would be the son of the now favored wife. So this is kind of what sages tell us he was thinking. Like, hey, if I can pull this off, Mom gets the favored spot that she's always wanted, and I might get some benefits because of this. So Reuben's actions would make Bilhah detestable to Jacob, exempting her from any spousal rights, right? She wouldn't be legally married in that sense.
Would they know Reuben did that? Or is he defiling her sort of,
This is the key. So let's go to Genesis 35:22. That's a great question. Great question. Yeah. So it was while Israel was living in the land that Reuben went up and slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. The only way this works is if it's publicly noted, right? If he does it in secret, it doesn't work. Then it's just fornication.
but it doesn't mar his name by doing that to her? Then it bumps him up too?
That's a great question.
Like, are you kidding?
Yeah. So let's go to, before we move on to that, 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel, chapter 16. Verses 20. Absalom said to, they changed the name there, Ahithophel, give your advice to us as to what we should do. Ahithophel answered Absalom, go in and sleep with your father's concubines, the one he left to take care of the palace. All Israel will hear that your father utterly despises you, and this will strengthen the position of all those who are on your side. So if you know the story of Absalom's revolt against David, right? Kind of drove David out, took the throne. There's a midrash that talks about that he went in and slept with all of his father's concubines because that's asserting his authority over his father, right? But in Absalom's case, he actually did this very publicly. The midrash says that he set up a large tent in the middle of the city, and he had great processions, right? It was almost like on this tower that had one way in, one way out, and so you would see all these women marching in and out of this tent as he's sleeping with all of them. He wanted to make it very public and very known. Yeah, and I forget how many concubines David had, but it was more than a few. So, but they say this was quite the spectacle according to that midrash. But now let's go back to Genesis 35. Genesis 49. We're going to go back to Reuben. But this is something that you would do if you wanted to exert power over somebody else. You would take his women. Genesis 49. This takes us out of our Torah portion, but we'll see what happens to Reuben. So then Jacob called for his sons and said, so he's on his deathbed, he's giving his last blessing to his sons, right? And he says, gather yourselves together and I will tell you what will happen to you in the last days. Assemble yourselves and listen, sons of Jacob. Pay attention to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, the first fruits of my manhood. Though superior in vigor and power, you are unstable as water. So your superiority will end. Because you climbed into your father's bed and defiled it, he climbed onto my concubine's couch. What happened to Reuben? It cost him his firstborn rights. He did not get an inheritance because of this action.
But he thought he was going to, like he thought it would elevate him somehow?
He thought he was going to get in good by doing this. Because mom would now be the favored wife. So therefore, because I'm the wife of the favored son, I can get the benefits.
Got it.
But it backfired. So this was interesting because without this information, we might just think, well, maybe he just couldn't control himself, what's going on, right? But that's what it was. It was trying to secure Leah a position as favored wife. A little bit of intrigue there. Now, when Jacob finally, again, this is another situation he's got to deal with, right? It's like, man, this is my firstborn son. Now I'm dealing with this mess, right? When Jacob finally comes back to Hebron, he was reunited with his father Isaac, and he finds out his mother had already died. And from the Torah, we don't see where he knew this prior, where he knew this beforehand. It's almost as if it was a shock, like, yeah, your mom passed. And we know he was closer with his mother than he was with his father, right? We know his father kind of favored Esau. Now that's where we'll leave Jacob at for this Parsha. But it just underscores the fact that his life was not a bed of roses. After wrestling by the river and overcoming, and he gets a new name, right? I'm fundamentally a different person. I have wrestled, I have overcome, I got the victory, I've got a new name, and I still got to go through a whole bunch of mess. We kind of poke fun at it, but as believers, we've led a lot of people down a garden path, per se, when we say, all you got to do is come to Yeshua. Yeah, life will be better. He's going to fix everything. Everything's going to be great. And, who wouldn't want to receive that message? All I got to do is believe, and my life gets better. Okay, right? But what happens? What happens when the excitement wears off? Right? When the butterflies are gone and you have to face hard situations. You told me all I have to do is believe and everything will be fine. And then sometimes we look at them, well, maybe you didn't believe right? We look down our long nose at them like they did something wrong. Because we didn't prepare people for the reality of being a disciple, which means you will endure hardship, you will endure persecution, you will face struggles in this life, yet fear not, because our Master, our God, our Lord has overcome the world. Obadiah, I'm not going to go too much into this. You can read it when you have some time. It's kind of an allegory. We did touch on it last time. It's an allegory between Jacob and Esau, right? And how there's always kind of this tension there. There's always this conflict. And how the descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau are still essentially two brothers struggling and fighting one another. So, interesting reading. Take a look. Now, our Brit Hadashah is in Hebrews. And let me see if I had that. Yeah, there's something I want to share from that. So we have the story of the Akedah, right? Isaac's sacrifice by Abraham, right? Or attempted sacrifice, rather. Abraham takes his son up to the mountain. He's going to sacrifice him at, the command of God, and then God stops him at the last minute. But it talks about how Abraham believed in God's promise, and we've discussed this. The promise was to make him a father of multitudes despite the requirement to sacrifice his only son. But Abraham believed the promise. God accounted to him his righteousness, as his faith. That's why he's known as the father of faith. In verse 11, let's pick that up. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11. By trusting, he received potency to father a child, even when he was past the age for it, as was Sarah herself, because he regarded the one who had made the promise as trustworthy. Therefore, this one man who was virtually dead fathered descendants, as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the grains of the sand on the seashore. So we have this example of his faith. Now, verses 11, or actually, verse 13. All right, let's pick it up there. It says, all these people kept on trusting until they died without receiving what had been promised. So this is interesting. We're lauding Abraham because of his faith. And yet we're saying he kept his faith, but he died in faith. He didn't get to see his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. He just believed it was going to happen because God said it. But he died in faith as a stranger and in exile. Let's finish the verse. All these people kept on trusting until they died without receiving what had been promised. They had only seen it and welcomed it from a distance, while acknowledging that they were aliens and temporary residents on the earth. This is for us today. They were strangers and exiles on the earth. What Noah, Abraham, and Jacob had in common was that they were all strangers and exiles on the earth. Just like them, for us today. In a shifting spiritual climate, we're strangers in a strange land. We don't recognize the world around us anymore. I was having a conversation with my mother just this past week, saying, I don't recognize this country. It's fundamentally different from what I remember growing up in. I'm not that old. It's not like I'm 60 and I can look back a whole lot of years. And just a handful of years have gone by and I don't recognize the country that I live in anymore. It feels foreign. It seems foreign to me. The things that are going on, I would have never conceived of even being a possibility in this country. And yet here they are, in our face. Before, as a believer, you kind of know that, fundamentally, ethereally, you're a stranger in a strange land. Now, I look around and I'm like, I am a stranger in a strange land because this is strange. This doesn't make sense to me and I don't fit here. The culture, the stuff that the culture is engaged in, we look at it and it's like, there's no level I can be a part of this. Right? It's like going to another country and you don't speak the language. Stuff is just wacky and weird and it doesn't fit. And you don't know what to do. And that's how it feels to me, especially as a believer. This is what our patriarchs went through. This is what they dealt with as people of faith in foreign lands, strange cultures that don't believe the way they do, don't do things the way they do. They had to deal with it. Matthew 26, it's another New Testament passage that is related to this Torah portion. It's a garden of Gethsemane, the passion of our Messiah Yeshua, where he makes the ultimate sacrifice. But even in the garden, for all that Yeshua was, for all that he is, part of the Godhead, right? Didn't sin, fully God, fully man. And he's in the garden. And he's sweating blood. And he's in duress. And he says, Father, let this cup pass from me. Dad, I don't want to do this. Is there a plan B? Like where I don't have to do this? He says, flesh. Like, look, flesh doesn't want to die. But yet, what is his response? Yet not my will, but yours. If this is what it is, this is what it is. And I'll accept it, and I'll carry it out. But he had to wrestle there. Our Master, our Lord, had to struggle. He had to deal with that situation. He didn't get a pass because he was the Son of God. I mean, how would have things turned out? He said, I don't think we're going to do that. This whole crucifixion thing, I can go rally all the Jews who are looking for a Messiah, and we'll become a military power, we'll take Rome out, and I'll rule, and then everything will be good. Right? He could have. Right? God did not force him to do this. Right? He had free will. Scripture says he was fully God, but he was also fully man. He had free will. He had the ability, if he so chose, to disobey. And so he's in the garden wrestling with that. Let this cup pass from me, yet not my will but yours. So if our Master has to wrestle, if our forefathers have to wrestle, if they have to go through all this stuff as strangers in a strange land, and we're looking on the horizon, it's interesting that they call it the time of Jacob's trouble. Right? That's the time we're moving into. We see that on the horizon. We have to prepare ourselves spiritually, mentally, possibly physically. Who knows how fast things will happen? I don't know. Could be years, could be weeks. We don't know. We wait on the Lord. But Jacob's trouble is coming to this country. And we don't get a pass from it. We're not going to be zapped out of here. Scripture talks about, those who endure to the end. Read Revelation. You'll see that phrase over and over and over. He who endures till the end. Something to think about. So here's a quote from the Jerusalem Post. This was way back in 2008 from Shlomo Rishkin. I thought it was neat to share. But it says, the moral fiber of a nation is revealed by the way in which it relates to the stranger or the other. The moral fiber of a nation is revealed by the way in which it relates to the stranger or the other. If we are the stranger and the other, how does our nation, how does it treat us? That gives us a glimpse as to the moral fabric of this country. And again, it goes without saying, it's not just the United States. We're not just picking on the USA here. You look at Canada, you look at other countries, right? A lot of Western countries, what we would call the civilized countries, we're not talking third world stuff. They're all going through some variant of this. Scripture calls us to be sensitive to the plight of the stranger, for we ourselves are strangers in this world. Our forefathers identified as strangers and foreigners. And it was this distinction that historically led first to their dehumanization and then to their oppression at the hands of a secular majority. We see this in Scripture. They treat you They dehumanize you because they don't value you. You're not sacred, you're not special. And then next comes the oppression. In the face of current trends, the need for wisdom and discernment is clear. Yet, and this is where I'm not just trying to preach a bunch of doom and gloom, we can take comfort in knowing that God is the shield of the oppressed. We see that in Scripture also. That those who are properly aligned to the Father, those who call upon Him, when hard times come, He is their shield. Right? Look at the Israelite people today. Historically, they have been, people have attempted to wipe them off the face of the globe for pretty much their entire existence, and yet they are still here. And it's not just the Israelite people, it's believers. America once enjoyed God's protections. Now I think there is a protection for the remnant, but the days of His hand over the entire nation, I think, is lifting. I know a lot of preachers have probably been saying that in one form or another for many, many years, but I think it's really accelerating now. And we're going to actually start to see it and feel it. God is the one who sees our struggles, and like our forebear Jacob, He makes a way for us to prosper and thrive under hardship. When Jacob was with Laban, he prospered and thrived under that. Right? When he was in the land, facing hostile nations, all kinds of stuff, God continued to prosper him. But he had to deal with things. And as I believe we are in the time of the great falling away, and there is a lot of things coming to this nation. Trust God for His protection, and we trust that He will prosper us. Not only protect us, but prosper us. That may look different than what we're expecting, but that's what we hang our hat on. That's what we put our faith on. So those are my thoughts from the Torah portion this week. Parsha Vayishlach, and He sent. So hopefully that was a blessing to you all.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah, we can do, what time is it? Yeah, we can do a few questions for Q&A if you'd like.
When it comes to like end times and like knowing things are going to get hard around here, one thing I think about often is what kind of races is it when you pass like the baton or something to the next person and they run?
Relay race.
Is that a relay race?
That's a relay race.
Well, if you know, they usually put the fastest people at the very end because they run the fastest and the hardest, the ones with most endurance. And so I always think about that with where we're at. Like, did God really place us in this time because He knew we could endure it? Were we chosen for this time? You know, I don't know, it brings me a lot of like, wow, it's going to get hard, but yet there's a reason I'm here. Oh, do you want to take him? Do you want to do Q&A since you're here? You want to go play? All right. Hold on. All right, so who wants to start?
I heard this week something that, it was funny, I voiced the thought when they answered it in the program I was watching on Sabbath. But Rachel and Leah, according to Jewish tradition, were twins. Because I always thought, how did he not know? But they said they were twins.
Oh, that's
and that
interesting.
really the only difference was their eyes. And so he didn't know because
Correct.
they were very, very similar. And then they made the comment, I found it so interesting when you look at Rachel and everything that happened with her, that just as God chose Jacob to be first, even though that God wanted Leah to be his bride. That was God's plan. Even though Laban did it out of motives.
Yeah.
And look, God blessed her with her womb
Oh,
was
yeah.
open. She loved Jacob. Rachel really was not an easy woman. You know, so it's interesting to me. And then when you pointed out that she also wasn't buried with the patriarchs,
Yeah.
that kind of clicked in my head too. Yeah, because she was never God's plan for Jacob.
That's
I
interesting.
thought it was just an interesting thought I heard this week.
Yeah, that's the thing about the twins. I had never heard that. That's actually pretty interesting.
Do you have any more questions or comments?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
This will be a post for next week on band.
Okay, this is where it's talking here about our forefathers identified as strangers and foreigners. Is that the distinction that you're talking about here?
Yes. Yeah, let's read those passages actually, because I put them in here. I didn't share them during the message, but we can read them right now. Genesis 23. Yeah, the idea is that the patriarchs were looking for a heavenly kingdom, right? They're looking beyond just the earthly promises. And so, because they're a part of that, by extension, that makes them strangers and foreigners in the land that they're in. So, Genesis 23, verses 3 and 4. Then he got up from his dead one and said to the sons of Het, I am a foreigner living as an alien with you. Let me have a burial site with you so that I can bury my dead wife. Some translations will use a little bit different verbiage there, but essentially this is Abraham saying, I am a foreigner, right? I am a sojourner here. And then Exodus chapter 2. Chapter 2, verses 21. Where are you? Moses was glad to stay on with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She gave birth to a son and called him, she gave birth to a son and he named him Gershom, which means foreigner there. For he said, I have been a foreigner in a foreign land. So Abraham identified as a sojourner, as a foreigner, as a stranger, and so did Moses. Because they recognized, and I think in the one sense, they were very physical. Yeah, I'm literally a stranger here, right? But then also, they're looking at a kingdom, right? Abraham, I'm expecting a promise, right? God promised. I'm looking to something bigger than me. And because I'm connected to that, in some sense, I'm disconnected here. And that's for us too, right? We're connected to a heavenly kingdom, right? To a sovereign God. And so because that's our primary connection, all this here, this is secondary, tertiary, whatever. But fundamentally, we're strangers. We're foreigners, right? We have a different government. We have a different home. We're just over here. I don't know if that answered your question or...
I'm just looking at this, when it's talking about this distinction, to me it seems slightly skewed, because it's almost as if it's saying the distinction meaning like because they identified as this, then that brought a lot of, I'll have to think about how to word
Well, so you're saying that because they identified a certain way that kind of they kind of highlighted themselves, right? And that brought them problems. Is that?
Sort of.
That's kind of what I'm saying here. And then that's just looking back historically, right? Not specifically at, them per se, but we do see that though with a lot of the biblical characters, right? They stand out from the culture around them. And that often plays out negatively more often than it does positively, right?
That's kind of what I was alluding to.
Yeah, that's how I see that. This whole dehumanization, when you start to think somebody else is less than you, that's a form of dehumanization, right? Somehow you're lesser than, and if you're lesser than, then by logical conclusion, if I'm greater than, I can do whatever, right? I can do whatever I want. And we, look at the Jews and the Nazis, right? At some point, the culture said, you are so less than, we can just round you up like cattle. And that's just one example. Look at other cultures. There's genocide that goes on today, right? And it's one group dehumanizing another group. And we see this with people of faith all over. There was just this, what was this past few months ago, this Nigerian student, right? She gets in an argument over text. There were some study group and she was talking and somebody says, hey, how did you get such good grades? And she says, well, Jesus helped me. Well, she happened to live in a Muslim country that enjoys Shahira law. And so they stoned her publicly and videotaped it. Took her life. Because she stood out, she identified, right? And it cost her something. Tragic and unfortunate, but it happens. Because the place where she lived and the people, the culture she interacted with did not value. There's no value placed on people who follow Yeshua. Right? If you follow Yeshua, you are less than, you're just meat. We'll do what we want. We see that all throughout history. And so that's why I phrased it that way. It's not that they were intending, like they were going out looking for it. But historically, when you stand with the Lord, the world stands against you.